Hello everyone, it's Shane Kanto, your Wasteland Reviewer, and this is my weekend review. And what date is it? That's a good question. We're moving along through December, and this was another busy week in terms of shows that I was watching. Didn't watch a whole lot of films that I'm not going to do full reviews on, so I just have a couple to talk about, including Vita and Virginia, which is a film starring Gemma Arterton and Elizabeth Debicki. And this film's about this relationship between a socialite and Virginia Woolf. And it starts off really engaging, and the acting in this film is very strong. And even just all the little subtle interactions between these characters as the relationship starts building between them. And I was really engaged. I really enjoyed the film. It had an interesting incorporation of tone with some of the music because it felt very modern music, but this is a period piece, so that was an interesting choice for the film. I know the film definitely towards the third act of the film, in terms of where the story goes, it becomes a little less engaging, and the film starts to lost me for a little bit, honestly. But overall, I think it was a pretty good film, and I really enjoyed it. I would recommend it. I also got to watch a film that I really, really enjoyed called Giant Little Ones, and this was a Netflix DVD that I got to watch. It's about a young man who is in high school, and him and his best friend get drunk one night, and something happens between them, and you're not exactly quite sure what happened. And it's interesting because that plays a lot into how the rest of the film goes, and perception between what the one friend says and our main character says, and how that affects his life and how people perceive him, his family, his classmates, his girlfriend, and then him developing this stronger relationship with his now ex-friend's sister. And it was a really powerful coming of age story, and it dealt with some very interesting and timely topics, including issues with transgender young people and dealing with that transition, and also young people coming out and dealing with their feelings. And I really like this film a lot. It's something that I would definitely recommend. And then it was definitely a busy week on the tube. Honestly, really the only show that I didn't watch again this week was because I didn't even realize this, but it was the season finale of C last week. So when I was talking about that episode, that was actually the season finale. And it really did come to a head. And it was that show, it's a bit muddled. It has a lot of subplots going on, but overall I enjoyed the experience watching this show. It looks cool, it's thrilling, but it's not a great show. But getting to the shows that I did watch this week, you have My Hero Academia, which where the show's going at this point in the season is one of those points where it's like it's a continuous episode, and our heroes, both the students and some of the professionals, are coming to blows with this gang that is the main antagonist of the season. And honestly, the episode that released last night was really inspiring, as it really centered on one of the heroes whose quirk is hardening and him coming to grips with becoming confident. And it was a cool episode. It utilized flashbacks and really gave you some backstory of that character, and it was really engaging. But honestly, the biggest talking point really for me this week in terms of shows is definitely the last episode of Watchmen that came out last week, which the season finale's tonight, which I'm super excited for. But how the episode utilized time and how it threaded so many details from the season together, and how things started clicking and is a really exciting episode. And it was probably the most Watchmen episode of this series so far, because it really brought in a lot of the details from the graphic novel and started bringing that story into this story. And that's exciting because honestly, after the first episode, I'm like, what does this really have to do with Watchmen? And now it's full blown, and I cannot wait for the finale because this show's getting crazy. His Dark Materials, it was the 6th episode of the first season that came out this week, and I'm starting to get engaged in it a little bit more, but still the show isn't 100% clicking for me. There's some exciting action in this episode, and it really started digging into like science fiction and more of the fantasy aspects of the show. And it definitely came to an exciting climax, and yet again, the show's leaving you off with a exhilarating cliffhanger to see where the show goes next, so I'll be tuning in tomorrow night to see that. Now, the morning show on Apple TV Plus is really coming to a head because there's only one episode now left in this season, if I'm not mistaken. I'm pretty sure it's only 10 episodes. And this episode really pushed the action of the season to a point, and you could kind of start to see where this season's going to come to a climax. But it's really starting to challenge the audience with who they sympathize with in terms of the cast of characters in the show. You're starting to get a lot more Steve Carell in the show now. Jennifer Aniston's character is put in a really difficult spot, and it's starting to get hard to hold a whole lot of sympathy for her. And there is a really, really, really uncomfortable conversation in this episode between Steve Carell's character and one of the women that he had relations with. And some of the dialogue is really on the nose, and it's just like, okay, Steve Carell really feels like a stereotype a lot of the times, but like Steve Carell owns it. He's a really strong actor, and I'm excited to see how this season ends. And then there's a new episode of Rick and Morty, which also there was no Bob's Burgers this week, so I didn't watch that. But Rick and Morty, Morty gets a dragon, and there's a lot of slut shaming and a lot of crazy dragon stuff. And, of course, Jerry has his own little thing with a weird cat, and that gets really dark because, you know, it's Rick and Morty. And this was a fun episode. I thought it was really enjoyable, and it had an interesting cameo performances from, like, Matthew Broderick and Liam Cunningham, a.k.a. Sir Davos from Game of Thrones, voice of Dragon. So that was pretty cool. And it was a fun episode. It wasn't my favorite episode of the season, but this has been a really strong season so far. And then, speaking of strong seasons and strong episodes, the most recent episode of The Mandalorian was awesome. And this really captured the serial nature of the show because it's like he's going on a mission with a ragtag group of scumbags of the galaxy. And you have like Clancy Brown and Richard Ayoade from the IT crowd voice a droid in this. And it was an exciting episode. There's some twists and turns. There's some fun cameo performances from characters from the original Star Wars trilogy. And it was exciting. And there were some fun moments with the child, aka Baby Yoda. And I really enjoyed the episode. And then there's The World According to Jeff Goldblum, which honestly is the nerdiest episode so far because he talked about gaming. And if I ever thought there was going to be a show about Jeff Goldblum, probably wouldn't have guessed. I was like, I want to see him LARP. But he did, and it was pretty cool. And obviously he's an actor, so he does that for a living. But it was a really interesting episode, and honestly it's Jeff Goldblum being Jeff Goldblum. For All Mankind, this show is also coming to a close. There's actually at least 3 shows, I guess, that I've been watching are all coming to their final episodes this coming week. So this was another second to last episode for All Mankind, and it's dealing with a lot of aftermath of a really, really emotionally impactful episode that appeared last week. And this show's really coming to a head, and Joel Kinnaman, who's our for the most part, the main character of the show, it really does feel like an ensemble, but he gets pushes himself to doing something that's really challenging, and with what the audiences feel about his character, and that aftermath, and his time on the moon coming to an end, I feel like are really 2 big reasons to want to tune in and see how this last episode goes. Now, honestly, probably by far the best show that I've been watching on Apple TV has been Servant, M. Night Shyamalan's show, and this recent episode has some really disturbing and twisted turns, and you spend a lot of time with the nanny in this episode, and for the most part she's been this creepy side character, but like this episode you really spend a lot of time with her, and Toby Kebbell's character is increasingly becoming more and more unlikable, especially with how he treats this young woman. And there's some messed up stuff in this episode, and some twists and turns, and some mystery involved. And honestly, I'm really excited to keep tuning into this show. And then, truth be told, I'm going to make a horrible pun, but truth be told, I don't care about this show very much. This show feels very melodramatic and over the top, and, like, it's just going to, let's try to one-up it in terms of, like, oh my god, this is where the show is going, and many of the characters really aren't very likable, and it has a good cast, because Octavia Spencer's in it, and Aaron Paul's in it, and Lizzie Kaplan's in it, but it's just like, I'm really hoping it starts clicking because it just feels really generic and just honestly feels more like a soap opera. I did get to finish this season of the Marvelous Mrs. Maisel, and dang, this season finale of this show really hits hard. It's one of my favorite episodes of the show so far. It was really funny, and honestly, it was one of Midge's best, like, on-screen comedic performances, so, like, when she's actually doing her stand-up in the show. But it causes a lot of interesting things to happen, and where this season has brought in our characters and where it leaves them is in very different places, and not only with Midge, but with Susie and Midge's parents, and her not ex-husband. And it's a really interesting show, and I love it. It's hilarious, but it's like you really care about the characters because they spend a lot of time with them. I finished watching the first season of Invader Zim, and it's just as weird as I remember. And the action's actually really cool in this show. I'm like, dang, this is really awesome for a kid's show. And it is also just as weird and grotesque and disgusting, especially the episode where all of the aliens not on their planets have to deal with this, like, converging of the planets and what happens to them as they get these disgusting growths and then kind of explode into giant, disgusting blobs. But it's definitely a cool show to go in and check out, especially after the Enter the Florpus came out, and that was a lot of fun. So I watched the 5th season of It's Always Sunny in Philadelphia, which honestly, this is one of those shows that it's so quick, I'm like, I finished the whole season already. Because they're very soft 20-minute episodes, and there's like 12 episodes a season. But this show, Danny DeVito is by far the best part of the show because Frank's hilarious, and for some reason, I don't hate him as much as everybody else. And especially with this season, I've begun to hate everybody a little bit less, except for one character who I really, really still hate. And also, I'm really bad with names. So for some reason, I can't remember his name, but I'm enjoying Mac more, and Charlie Day's just enjoyable. He can get a little bit much, but the other guy, hate him. Smug bastard. But its show has a lot of fun episodes, especially the World Series episode where they try to blame the Phillies World Series on them getting parking tickets, and also them putting on the wrestling show for the troops, and Danny DeVito being the garbage man. And then I watched the first episode of Jack Ryan, the first season, and John Krasinski is John Krasinski, and I like watching him. And it definitely feels like that modern day espionage kind of show, which I feel like a lot of people, when you think about, it's like Jack Ryan is like action, but like he's more of an analyst and kind of gets thrown into the action because he doesn't want to be in part of the action. And it's definitely a very timely show dealing with a lot of very timely issues in terms of foreign policy and stuff like that. So I'm interested. I'm going to keep watching. I got 7 more episodes of this season. But yeah, there's a lot of TV shows I'm watching right now. But if you guys want to talk about any of them, comment. Let me know what you think. And let's talk some TV. Let's talk some movies. But thank you as always for tuning in and